No ice with him. $50, he said. His office was large and bare and contained just one small desk with 2 sheets of paper in a drawer. He leant back and stared at the ceiling, which had obviously seen a lot of this sort of thing going on. Then he leant forward again and pulled the palms of his hands slowly down over his face as if he was trying to peel it off. He said again, $50 each, and then stared idly at the corner of his desk and rolled a pencil slowly in his fingers. We were subjected to an hour of this before he finally tired of our appalling French and let us go. We emerged blinking from the airport and miraculously met up with the driver that some friends of Mark's had organised to take us up into the Virunga volcanoes, where the northern mountain gorillas lived. The gorillas were not the animals we'd come to Zaïre to look for. It is very hard, however, to come all the way to Zaïre and not to go and see them. I was going to say that this is because they are our closest living relatives, but I'm not sure that's an appropriate reason. Generally, in my experience, when you visit a country in which you have any relatives living, there's a tendency to want to lie low and hope they don't find out you're in town. At least with the gorillas, you know that there's no danger of having to go out to dinner with them and catch up on several million years of family history, so you can visit them with impunity. They are, of course, only collateral relatives, nth cousins n times removed. We are both descended from a common ancestor who is sadly no longer with us, and who has, since Darwin's day, been the subject of endless speculation as to what manner of creature he or she was. The section of the primate family of which we are members, rich, successful members of the family, the ones who made good and who should, by any standards, be looking after the other, less well-off members of the family, are the great apes. We do not actually call ourselves great apes, though. Like many of the immigrants at Ellis Island, we have changed our names. The family we call the great apes includes the gorillas, of which there are 3 subspecies, mountain, eastern lowland and western lowland, 2 species of chimpanzee, and the orangutans of Borneo and Sumatra. We do not like to include ourselves in it. In fact, the classification great apes was originally created specifically to drive a wedge between us and them, and yet it is now widely accepted that the gorillas and chimpanzees separated from us on the evolutionary tree more recently than they did from other great apes. This would mean that the gorillas are more closely related to us than they are to the orangutans. Any classification which includes gorillas and orangutans must therefore include us as well. One way or another, we and the gorillas are very, very close relatives indeed, almost as close to each other as the Indian elephant and the African elephant, which also share a common extinct ancestor. The Virunga volcanoes, where the mountain gorillas live, straddle the border of Zaïre, Rwanda and Uganda. There are about 280 gorillas there, roughly 2/3 of which live in Zaïre and the other third in Rwanda. I say roughly because the gorillas are not yet sufficiently advanced in evolutionary terms to have discovered the benefits of passports, currency declaration forms and official bribery, and therefore tend to wander backwards and forwards across the border as and when their beastly primitive whim takes them. A few stragglers even pop over into Uganda from time to time, but there are no gorillas actually living there as permanent residents, because the Ugandan part of the Virungas only covers about 25 square kilometres, is unprotected, and full of people, whom the gorillas, given the choice, would rather steer clear of. The drive from Goma takes about 5 hours, and we made the hastiest departure we could manage, after 2.5 hours of serious madness with a ticket agent, a hotel manager, a lunch break, and one of the larger national banks, which it would be tedious to relate, but not half as tedious as it was to undergo. Things hit a limit, though, when I was set upon by a pickpocket in a baker's shop. I didn't notice that I was being set upon by a pickpocket, which I'm glad of, because I like to work only with professionals. Everybody else in the shop did notice, however, and the man was hurriedly manhandled away and ejected into the street, while I was still busy choosing buns. The baker tried to tell me what had happened, but my Zaïrois French wasn't up to it, and I thought he was merely recommending the currenty ones, of which I therefore bought 6. Mark arrived at that moment with some tinned pears, our gorilla permits, and our driver, who quickly understood what was going on and explained to me what had happened. He also explained that the currant buns were no good, but said we may as well keep them because none of the others were any good either, and we had to have something. He was a tall, rangy Muslim with an engaging smile, and he responded very positively to the suggestion that we should now get the hell out of here. When people talk of darkest Africa, it's usually Zaïre they have in mind. This is the land of jungles, mountains, enormous rivers, volcanoes, more exotic wildlife than you'd be wise to shake a stick at, hunter-gatherer pygmies who are still largely untouched by Western civilization, and one of the worst transport systems anywhere in the world. This is the Africa in which Stanley presumed to meet Dr. Livingstone. Until the 19th century, this enormous tract of Africa was simply a large black hole in the centre of any European map of the dark continent. But it was only after Livingstone's penetration of the interior that the black hole began to exercise any gravitational effect on the outside world. The first people to pour in were the missionaries, Catholics who arrived to teach the native populace that the Protestants were wrong, and Protestants who came to teach that the Catholics were wrong. The only thing the Protestants and Catholics agreed about was that the natives had been wrong for 2,000 years. These were closely followed by traders in search of slaves, ivory, copper, and suitable land on which plantations could be established. With the help of Stanley, who was on a 5-year contract to open up the interior of Africa, King Leopold of the Belgians successfully laid claim to this vast region in 1885, and promptly subjected its inhabitants to an exceptionally brutal and ruthless form of colonization, thus giving them a practical and convincing demonstration of what wrong actually meant. When news of the worst atrocities leaked to the outside world, Leopold was forced to hand over his land to the Belgian government, who took it upon themselves to do virtually nothing about it. But by the 1950s, independence movements were sweeping across Africa, and after riots and appalling massacres in the capital of Kinshasa in 1959, the colonial authorities were shaken so badly that they granted independence the following year. The country eventually changed its name from the Belgian Congo to Zaïre in 1971. Zaïre, incidentally, is about 80 times the size of Belgium. Like most colonies, Zaïre had imposed on it a stifling bureaucracy, the sole function of which was to refer decisions upwards to its colonial masters. Local officials rarely had the power to do things, only to prevent them being done until bribed. So, once the colonial masters are removed, the bureaucracy continues to thrash around like a headless chicken with nothing to do other than trip itself up, bump into things, and, when it can get the firepower, shoot itself in the foot. You can always tell an ex-colony from the inordinate numbers of people who are able to find employment stopping anybody who has anything to do from doing it. 5 hours of sleepy bumping in the van brought us to Bukima, a village in the foothills of the Virungas, which marks the point where the road finally gives up and from which we have to travel on by foot. Set a little way above the village, in front of a large square, was an absurdly grand ex-colonial building, empty except for an absurdly small office tucked into the back, where a small man in an army uniform pored over our gorilla permits with a grim air of bemusement, as if he'd never seen one before, or at least not for well over an hour. He then occupied himself with the shortwave radio for a few minutes, before turning to us and saying that he knew exactly who we were, had been expecting us, and that because of our contacts with the World Wildlife Fund in Nairobi, he was going to allow us an extra day with the gorillas, and who the hell were we anyway, and why had no one told him we were coming? This seemed on the face of it to be unanswerable, so we left him to try and figure it out for himself, while we went to look for some porters to help us with our baggage for the 3-hour walk up to the warden's hut, where we were to spend the night. They weren't hard to find. There was a large band of them gathered hopefully around our van, and our driver was eager to know how many we needed to carry all our bags. He seemed to emphasize the word all rather strongly. There was a sudden moment of horrible realization. We had been so keen to clear out of Goma as fast as possible that we had forgotten a major part of our plan, which was to leave the bulk of our gear at a hotel in town. As a result of this oversight, we had more baggage with us than we actually needed to carry up to the gorillas. A lot more. As well as basic gorilla watching kit, jeans, t-shirt, a sort of waterproof thing, a ton of cameras and tins of pears, there was also an immense store of dirty laundry, a suit and shoes for meeting my French publisher in Paris, a dozen computer magazines, a thesaurus, half the collected works of Dickens, and a large wooden model of a Komodo dragon. I believe in travelling light, but then I also believe I should give up smoking and shop early for Christmas. Hiding our considerable embarrassment, we chose a team of porters to carry this little lot up into the Virunga volcanoes for us. They didn't mind. If we were prepared to pay them to carry Dickens and aftershave up to the gorillas and back down again, then they were perfectly happy to do it.